72. Deputy Higgins.
Good morning, and I would like to ask the Minister to deal with the issue of direct provision for those seeking asylum and the unsuitability of continuing with those particular arrangements, particularly in view of the effects on the human beings who are the subject of this, and particularly the effect on the children concerned.
Well, Deputy, as you know, the Reception and Integration Agency, or IA, of my department is responsible for the accommodation of protection applicants in accordance with government policy in this country. I spent some time recently visiting Mosney and met with many of the residents there and the staff and management. And clearly, I would acknowledge that the length of time that residents spend in direct provision is clearly an issue to be addressed. My immediate priority is that the factors which lead to delays in the processing of cases are dealt with so that protection seekers spend as little time as necessary in direct provision. And a key priority for government is the legislative reform aimed at establishing a single application procedure for the investigation of all grounds for protection and any other grounds presented by applicants seeking to remain in the state. I really do believe that such reform would substantially simplify and streamline the existing arrangements by removing the current multi-layered and sequential processes that clearly people get caught up in, choose to use, have to use, because it would provide applicants with a final decision on their application in a more straightforward and timely fashion. And I do want to inform the House that I am reviewing the work done to date in respect of the Immigration, Residence and Protection Bill, and will then decide on how best to progress the implementation of this priority, in particular to expedite the aspects of that bill that will lead to the establishment of a single application procedure. With regard to the more specific matters that you have raised, there are, as we know, 4,353 people availing of direct provision accommodation in 34 centres. 38% are children under 18, as you point out. 68% of those residents first claimed international protection here 3 or more years previously. I do want to put on the record of this House, however, that centres are inspected 3 times a year, once by an independent company. Obviously, there are various clinics and support services which are made available to residents in direct provision. I certainly saw that in Mosney. There are a range of support services. Young children can attend the ECCE programme, for example. I also want to say that the child protection policy and Garda vetting policy are in place for all centres. It's very important to put that on the record, that all of those safety issues apply to the centres as much as they do anywhere else. And there is a complaints mechanism as well. I have personally asked RIA, for example, and they've done this, and you will notice it in the annual report which comes out this year, that statistics in relation to children in direct provision are highlighted and as much information as possible given in relation to them.
Thank you, Mr. Come back to the Minister.
I'll just conclude by saying there is a child protection policy based on the HSE's Children First national guidance for the protection and welfare of children that is applied. But I do take the overall point that you make in relation to the difficulties of spending long periods in direct provision.
Joe Higgins.
Well, Minister, everyone agrees indeed that the whole decision-making needs to be expedited hugely. There's no question about that. But my question, and I thoroughly agree with that, but my question really deals with the existing conditions and those conditions going into the future, because the people who are there still face a long period of time. And would you not agree that the conditions of life which are enforced on people as a result of the current method of direct provision just are not human? As you said, 38% are children. Isn't it really unsuitable, that children should be in an environment for 3 to 5 years or even less time, where they never know a mother or a father to cook a meal. It's because it's not possible in these cases.
Thank you, Deputy.
Or never see a parent or an elder sibling go out to work, for example, because they are prohibited from working, where there is really very, very little privacy, where there is no right to education, with the resultant de-skilling of people, and where there is isolation, really, from our society.
Thank you.
Don't you agree that that's really, really inhuman and should be changed while you are trying to deal also with the process of hearing people's stories?
Minister?
Well, what I would say is that I certainly believe that we have to ensure in the centres where people are living that the very best possible standards apply. And as I say, when I was in Mosney recently and met the staff and management there, and I'm sure you've been to visit some of these centres yourself, I mean, clearly quite a lot of work is done in terms of trying to ensure that, given the circumstances that apply, that people's needs are met as best as possible. But of course, any provision system like this is inextricably linked to the surrounding international protection process. And countries vary, as you know, in how they deal and the type of accommodation, how they deal with the challenges in relation to the numbers of people who are seeking refugee status or seeking asylum. Countries vary in terms of the types of accommodation, and clearly Ireland has taken a decision to provide a certain type of accommodation. I think that the biggest problem I would see at present with it, or certainly one of the key issues, is the one I have mentioned. It is the length of time that people are spending in direct provision. And I certainly would want to bring forward legislative reform aimed at establishing that single application procedure for the investigation of all grounds for protection and any other grounds presented by the applicants who are seeking asylum. Because I do believe that if we deal with that issue and deal with the length of time, it would go a long way, obviously, to improving the situation.
Thank you. Deputy Higgins.
Minister, I am not going to make any suggestion that some of the horror stories we've held in the last weeks in regard to our past and how children were treated, that would be equatable with this day. But I'll make the general point that we have learned lessons from the horrors that were inflicted on people and women and children, particularly in the past. And I put it to you, while taking into account what I said first, that we should realize that people are being damaged because of the conditions of life in direct provision, and it's a dehumanizing effect on children. And also, are you aware that in some cases women in particular can be more vulnerable in these circumstances, where there might unfortunately be a situation of some violence or assault? These conditions exacerbate that. That's what the people who work with those in direct provision tell us. We have to take it very, very seriously. So I'm saying to you that as well as pushing forward on the issue of the process of people seeking refuge, that this issue needs urgently to be looked at and changed, and direct provision changed fundamentally from what it is at the present time.
Thank you. Deputy Humphreys, briefly.
I just want to acknowledge that 60,000 people have received Irish citizenship since the government came into power, and I want to welcome the Minister's reply. But I'd just like to ask the Minister, has she considered putting a process in place where people, where people who are longest waiting on their application to be dealt with, would she consider prioritising those people? Because some of those families would have children who have been there up to 9 years and have known nothing else, only to live in this type of accommodation.
Minister, final reply now.
Clearly, where it is possible to make the kind of decision that you're talking about, to deal with the last question from Deputy Humphreys, clearly that will be done. But I would point out that very frequently the reason for the very long delays are because individuals are taking a whole range of judicial reviews and other legal remedies for the case, which then prohibits the kind of discretion which you're suggesting. But I would make the point as well that until this year it was very difficult to compare how we were doing in relation to other countries, but we do have a report now from the European Migration Network which looked at 23 countries and made recommendations about good practice and dealing as sensitively as possible with people who are seeking asylum, Deputy Higgins, and I think that certainly we will be examining that. And I do agree with you, of course, that women and children are very vulnerable in these circumstances, and that's why I do want to put on the record that we do have the inspection regimes. We do apply children first. The young children who are in direct provision do have access to the ECCE schemes. They attend local primary and secondary schools, but I would repeat again that I do believe the length of time that families are spending in direct provision is certainly a key issue that needs to be addressed urgently, and that's why I'm considering dealing with that ahead of dealing with the full immigration bill.
Thank you. Deputy Moran.